Okay, just a very brief introduction to net zero architecture. I found this article just while cruising, and I thought it makes a couple of good points, and of course has very pretty pictures of buildings which are based on the net zero principles. We already know that net zero doesn't mean that you are not emitting any carbon. It's just that whatever inevitable carbon emissions or typically net zero does not include other greenhouse gases. It's not net zero CO2 equivalent, but net zero CO2. So whatever you emit has to be drawn down in some ways, right? So what is net zero architecture? The terms and designs of design strategies are obviously important if people are going to be certified. There is already the LEED certification, which is about environmental energy and environmental design strategies. This is about net zero. For buildings, obviously there is always the issue of aesthetics. It has to look good, has to have sufficient light, whether it's home or a working building, has to recycle water, save energy, use little energy, use natural energy, not pollute, and so on and so forth. So has to be ergonomic, has to have as much green space around or inside, and so on and so forth. So just focusing on carbon, this article looks at upfront carbon during construction. At the use stage, there is operational carbon like energy. Transportation is not included in the building itself, but there are other uses like pumping water, running air conditioning, etc. Use stage embodied carbon, so that goes into what you lock up in the construction, the building itself. Let's say you bring in furniture, you bring in other things, computers, etc. That go into somewhere here between operational and use stage embodied carbon. Embodied carbon is something that is like a log that is standing there, which has carbon in it and is being used in a building. So depends on whether it's a use stage or construction stage. And there is end of life carbon, and some estimates say that cities like Mumbai, which is pretty old in terms of the standing buildings, and buildings tend to get dangerous to live in or have to be brought down and rebuilt on the order of 50 to 60 years, depending on whether you have the old Roman and other Indian structures that have stood for centuries and so on. So most of the modern concrete constructions need to be recycled. So imagine the amount of waste product they will create. So end of life carbon is critical as well. So how do people contribute to these various carbons? Architects tend to be high on upfront carbon but reduce operational carbon, and use stage embodied carbon is medium, end of life carbon is high. So you can see where net zero principles have to come in to manage these. Engineers tend to be low on upfront carbon, high in operational, medium in use stage, embodied carbon, and end of life carbon used to be low in the way they think about design strategies and building. Cities, states, and regional authorities, when they do public structures, tend to be low in upfront carbon, but operational carbon can be high. Use stage embodied carbon can be low, and end of life carbon can be low. So obviously I'm not giving you details of how these are calculated or why this is the way it is. You have to follow up the article. It's a very short article, but it has a lot of details behind it. I just want you to want to give you a sense of how to think about architecture and carbon. Okay, so construction product manufacturers don't care much about upfront carbon, so they have high carbon in the beginning, operational carbon is low, use stage embodied carbon is low, and end of life carbon is high. Contractors, similar to construction product manufacturers, except their end-of-life carbon is low because they want to probably recycle as many things as possible. Property developers are similar to these two, but you can see that their end-of-life carbon is here estimated to be medium again, because they may be doing things in a way that saves end-of-life carbon by recycling, etc. Property managers, agents, and advisors are not involved typically in constructions like tenants and occupiers, and they are not involved in end-of-life carbon. They just come in, they manage and sell or lease, and they leave, right? So operational carbon can be medium for property managers, agents, and advisors, because they probably try to do optimization of water, energy, and so on. Whereas tenants and occupants are probably not that careful, because it depends on whether they have to pay the bill or not, for example, and that can be high. Use stage embodied carbon can be high for property managers, agents, and advisors, while it's medium for tenants and occupants. Okay, take it for what it is, but remember that these are the things we have to worry about: upfront carbon, operational carbon, use stage embodied carbon, and end-of-life carbon, to make the architectural principles, terms, and designs to be net zero. I'll just run through few images so you can see how nice green space, aesthetics, energy production, light, and so on are being used in construction. So there is the interior space, again having some greenery inside, and there is the space in the middle, which is again very green and light efficient on both sides, with some aesthetic attention as well. If you have such a lovely space, obviously you are maintaining biodiversity, merging with the background, and having all the efficiencies of light, energy, and water use, etc., without harming the environment around. Here is another beautiful space with lots of aesthetics, greenery, and you can imagine that this is almost like a outdoor porch. The main building is behind here, so this is the so-called light room or the sun room, which also probably serves as a greenhouse to maintain gardens and so on. Here is another beautiful use of space in terms of light, sitting space outside with garden and light, working space, living space. You can see various things here. The way it's distributed looks beautiful, isn't it? So here is again paying attention to energy and use of surroundings to keep the impacts minimum. I think this is St. Francis Church as an example of reuse of space, so that even when you are reusing old buildings, you can retrofit the net zero principles. Many of the retrofitting include increasing energy efficiencies, like the Empire State Building, which spent I think a couple of $100 million on retrofitting the old building for energy efficiency, and they are expected to recover that retrofitting cost in a certain number of years in terms of reduced energy expenditure and energy cost. Of course, you cannot put a value on non-market goods like greenhouse gas emissions and the impacts on health and other things when you retrofit and reduce your energy use. Okay, I just wanted to include it. It's a very brief introduction, but you can follow up more if you're interested. Okay.